Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning. Let's continue with our discussion of Girish Karnad's important play, Tughlaq, which is based on the historical life of the mid-14th century Delhi Sultan, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, 1325 to 1341, and reworks it to illuminate the life of Tughlaq, to illuminate the contradictions that constitute political sovereignty. Right. So, this is one of those well-known examples of historical drama by Girish Karnad, which like his other plays on, let's say, for example, Tipu Sultan, which is called The Dreams of Tipu, both use historical figures and reworks them to give them a contemporary political significance. One of Karnad's earliest works, Tughlaq, which he wrote when he was just 26, this is 1964, also bears, as Karnad said of the play, a contemporary political significance in the allusions its protagonist, the Sultan Tughlaq, makes to modern political figures of various ideological dispensations. Whether it is Gandhi's individualist spirituality or Nehru's ecstatic visions of national vitality that we imagine to be a function of the love between the leader and the people, and the fantasies of absolute power, which include Indira and Sanjay Gandhi, and more recently Muslim, Hindu and Sikh fundamentalists. So you can think of Tughlaq as a composite figure, someone who includes these different strands of political and ideological thought. On one hand, you have, for example, the irony between Tughlaq being someone who wants to renounce violence, someone who wants to be imagined as a secular humanist who brings about certain reformist measures in his kingdom, namely, lifting the jizya tax, which was levied on non-Muslim populations. Or as someone who believes that he is the object of the people's devotion, that he is an ideal and just ruler. Or he's also seen sometimes in the play as someone who is pursuing his own fantasies of absolute power, which invariably end up in defeat, in betrayal, in bloodshed. And so you see these different ideological dispensations working together, and there's no resolution to these different ideological camps, ideological standpoints in the figure of Tughlaq. So over the course of the play, it becomes impossible to reconcile these different phases of facets of Tughlaq's self, which remains unstable and fragmented constructs that do not possess or reveal any kind of a stable essence. So there's a constant, for example, reference to performance, to masks, to playing and acting in the play. Right? So this constant use of these terms seems to suggest that Tughlaq's performance, right, as a sultan, as a king, as someone who would like to be perceived as someone who is just an ideal ruler, in fact foregrounds or exposes the instability and the sense of fragmentation that Tughlaq experiences across the play through the various encounters that he has with the different characters, especially our characters, people who he had most trusted in his life, end up betraying him for various reasons. The play itself comprises of the Sultan himself, Then there is Azam and his childhood friend Aziz, who is a lowly Muslim washerman. The Sultan's stepmother, incestuous stepmother, his Prime Minister Najib, his court chronicler and historian Barani, the Sheikh Imamuddin. You have one of the court nobles, Shiabuddin, another noble Ratan Singh. Then you have the Sheikh Shamsuddin and the Abbasid Caliph of Baghdad, Ghiyasuddin Abbasid. Over the course of the play, the Sultan is repeatedly betrayed by the people he most trusts, which compels him to question and uphold his own principles and ideals of justice. So you see the growing, increasing isolation of Tughlaq, his sense of loneliness, his sense of self-doubt that plagues him throughout the play as more and more people betray him, deceive him for power. What emerges from the reading of the play is a monarch who believes he is a transcendental subject above and without the laws of justice that he formulates. So the problem lies in the fact that he always perceives himself as someone who is above and beyond the very laws of justice that he formulates to rule his kingdom. Right? So it's never a sense of justice which is being constructed by specific situations, by the relationship that he shares with the people, but it is something that is unanimously, unilaterally imposed by Tughlaq on his people, simply because he's driven by a particular ideal of justice. Right? And that ideal, of course, itself remains fairly vague. It's an ideal, and you're not entirely sure what the ideal kingdom would look like for the Sultan. He's always contradicting himself. He's always pulled apart by the various contradictory ideological positions that he occupies throughout the play. There is only an absolute notion of the good that for Tughlaq is above the historical considerations of his different subjects and citizens. By the end, the Sultan is confronted by the ironies of his political decisions that only result in death and bloodshed. The Sultan initially presents himself as a secular humanist who is willing to acknowledge his own mistake of levying jizya tax on a Brahmin and illegally appropriating his land. So even his desire to shift the capital from Delhi to Devgir or Daulatabad, which is a Hindu majoritarian city, is Tughlaq's wish to win the favor of the Hindus in his state, in his kingdom. And he also wants to be known as a symbol of Hindu-Muslim unity. And but ironically, the journey from Delhi to Daulatabad, which is more centrally located, because Tughlaq is concerned and anxious that Delhi is on the fringes of the kingdom and can always be beset, attacked by war by neighboring chieftains and kings. And he also wishes to actually secure the southern extremities of his kingdom, which is why he decides to move the capital to Daulatabad, which is more centrally located. And so he does the move for strategic reasons, but also for reasons of religious harmony and unity, right? Because he wants to be perceived by the Hindu majoritarian population as a symbol as a secular symbol of unity and love. But the journey from Delhi to Daulatabad actually ends in starvation, in illness, and disease and death. Right? Because although there's a very powerful scene, in fact the play itself is divided into 13 scenes, and in one of the scenes towards the middle of the play, you have a vision of starvation and death as the people make a long line on their way to Daulatabad, but end up losing their health, their lives and their property, their assets to wayside robbers. So the collapse of his empire results in famine, rebellions and economic chaos. The theatre scholar Dharwadkar draws our attention to another level of irony, which is Tughlaq competing for power with his incestuous stepmother, the historian Barani, and a powerful but credulous rival, Sheikh Imamuddin, who resembles him. But Tughlaq's real double, in fact, the play makes use of a doppelganger motif. The first double is the Sheikh Imamuddin, who resembles the Sultan. But the real double here is Aziz, who is the Muslim washerman who subverts each and every move of Tughlaq's by impersonating the Brahmin who loses his land and money to the Sultan. He is also the wayside robber who steals from the sick and dying travelers as they journey from Delhi to Daulatabad. He also produces counterfeit currency after the imperial decree to produce copper currency, and he also impersonates and kills the Abbasid Caliph Ghiyasuddin, who has been invited by the Sultan to bless and purify his new capital, Daulatabad. So let us first look at the early passages of the play, which would demonstrate the Sultan's desire to be a symbol of Hindu-Muslim unity. Right? So he wants to be perceived as a reformist ruler, a secular humanist in the early portion of the first scene. So in the first scene on page 7 and 8, Muhammad bin Tughlaq announces, "My beloved people, you have heard the judgment of the Qazi and seen for yourselves how justice works in my kingdom, without any consideration of might or weakness, religion or creed. May this moment burn bright and light up our path towards greater justice, equality, progress and peace, not just peace but a more purposeful life." Now this is the Tughlaq's response to the Qazi's announcement that the Brahmin who has been, the Brahmin Vishnu Prasad, who had lost his land to the Sultan, has been given back his land, and the jizya tax that had been levied on Vishnu Prasad has also been lifted. Right? So earlier on, the Qazi's announcer says, "Attention, attention, in the name of the Allah, it is hereby announced that Vishnu Prasad, a Brahmin of Shiknar, had filed a suit against His Merciful Majesty that his land had been seized illegally by the officers of the state and that he should be given just compensation for the loss of the land and the privation resulting therefrom. The Qazi Imam Malik, having considered this matter carefully, has declared that the Brahmin's claim is just, and that His Merciful Majesty is guilty of illegal appropriation of land. The Qazi Imam Malik has further declared that in return for the land and in compensation of the privation resulting from its loss, the said Vishnu Prasad should receive a grant of 500 silver dinars from the state treasury. His Merciful Majesty has accepted the decision of the Qazi Imam Malik as just, and in addition to the grant of 500 silver dinars, has offered the said Vishnu Prasad a post in the civil service to ensure him a regular and adequate income." So Vishnu Prasad is not only exempted from paying the land jizya tax, he's given back his land and he's also given the position in the civil service, right, with a regular income. So in response to that, Muhammad is very proud of himself, much to the resentment of his Muslim subjects, that peace and harmony, equality and justice have reigned in his kingdom because of his rule. And to achieve this end, Tughlaq goes on to say, "I am taking a new step in which I hope I shall have your support and cooperation. Later this year, the capital of my empire will be moved from Delhi to Daulatabad. And the crowd, of course, is shocked and just, bewildered. Your surprise is natural, but I beg you to realize that this is no mad whim of a tyrant. My ministers and I took this decision after careful thought and discussion. My empire is large now and embraces the south, and I need a capital which is at its heart. Delhi is too near the border, and as you will know, its peace is never free from the fear of invaders. But for me, the most important factor is that Daulatabad is a city of the Hindus, and as the capital, it will symbolize the bond between Muslims and Hindus, which I wish to develop and strengthen in my kingdom. I invite you all to accompany me to Daulatabad. This is only an invitation and not an order. So initially it is an invitation and later it becomes an order. Only those who have faith in me may come with me. With their help, I shall build an empire which will be the envy of the world. Right? So it's almost as though his move from Delhi to Daladabad is a way of testing the loyalty of his people. Only those who will believe in him will actually follow him, will make the arduous journey from Delhi to Devgir. Then there are also rumors amongst the people who are listening to the Sultan announcing his move to shift the capital from Delhi to Daulatabad, and we learn that the Sultan had actually murdered his father and brother when they were at prayer. Right? So there are these rumors spreading, and of course Sultan does not immediately confirm the veracity of the rumors, but initially we get to know that the Sultan had actually killed his father and brother during prayer, all for an ideal. And so the people who are listening to him speak, presumably Muslims, are very disappointed with the Sultan for having desecrated Islam, for having corrupted the very act of praying by the purity of praying, by murdering his father and brother when they were at prayer. And the people in the crowd also describe the eloquence, how entrancing the Sheikh Imamuddin is when he gave a sermon, long speech to the audience about the Sultan's un-Islamic act and his desecration of Islam by murdering his father and brother during prayer. So the people are completely taken over by the Sheikh's erudition, the Sheikh's eloquence, and his absolutely gravitating personality. And they also insinuate the resemblance of the Sultan with the Sheikh, right? So the kind of symbolic resemblance, identification of the Sultan with the Sheikh is established early on in the play, right? So it's almost suggesting that there is another side to the Sultan, which embodies the intolerance of religious thought, right? A certain intolerant side perhaps to Islam which comes through in the play. And then there's a lot of argument also because when one of the Hindu men in the crowd says that perhaps the Sultan has derived his habit of making speeches from the Sheikh, the other people in the crowd, the Muslims, are very upset and saying that he is an infidel to actually mock a saint like the Sheikh. You also have Aziz and Azam, childhood friends in the audience. One of whom is Aziz, who wishes to actually, who plans to impersonate the Brahmin Vishnu Prasad in order to actually subvert the Sultan's decision to lift the jizya tax from non-Muslims and give him a position also in his own court. So Aziz decides to actually impersonate a Brahmin. He shaves his head and he goes to Vishnu Prasad, whose land has been confiscated by the Sultan, and he also buys Vishnu Prasad's land with a post-dated contract. Right? So he backdates the contract and he buys Vishnu Prasad's land from him, and he also earns a good 500 silver dinars from the transaction, because he buys Vishnu Prasad's land, he impersonates him, and he also gets back the money that belonged to Vishnu Prasad from the Sultan's civil service. Right? So he gets money, and he also gets Vishnu Prasad's job in the civil service. And then Azam is worried and shocked. He says, "Why did you have to dress up in these ungodly clothes? Couldn't you have come like a proper Muslim?" And Aziz scandalized says, "But then what would happen to the king's impartial justice? A Muslim plaintiff against a Muslim king?" Right? So he's obviously exploiting, manipulating the Sultan's self-image as a secular humanist. He doesn't want to present himself as a Muslim plaintiff against a Muslim king. And he says that's exactly why he dressed up as a Brahmin, right? And he impersonates Vishnu Prasad so that he can seemingly uphold the secular credentials of the Sultan. I mean, where's the question of justice there? Aziz asks. Where's the equality between Hindus and Muslims? If, on the other hand, the plaintiff's a Hindu Well, he saw the crowds. Azam says it's complicated. Aziz replies, it's a bit too subtle for you. Anyway, here's my offer. From tomorrow, I join the civil service. Why don't you come along too? I'll get you a job under me. You know, a Brahmin with a Muslim friend, the Sultan would like that. So he's constantly exploiting the Sultan's self-impressions, his idealization of Hindu-Muslim unity and Hindu-Muslim bonds. So Aziz and Azam have a lot to gain from the Sultan's seemingly secular credentials and his move to Daulatabad, because they actually make a lot of money, a lot of unfair wages and money from the move. Right? If you look at the character of the stepmother, she's someone who seems to bear an incestuous love for Muhammad, but she's also someone who wants to control him. Right? She resents the authority and control that the historian Barani has over the Sultan, or for that matter, the control, the faith that the Sultan has in Najib, who is his prime minister, which is what then compels her to poison Najib and kill him, much to the Sultan's shock. Meanwhile, the move from Delhi to Daulatabad also wins resentment of some of the nobles in his court, one of whom is Ain-ul-Mulk, who is the governor of Agra, right? And he shares a rapport with the people of Agra. He has won their faith and loyalty in his rule, and he is very upset. He is betrayed when the Sultan transfers him to the governorship of the Deccan. And so he does not want to actually move from Agra to the Deccan, and so he decides to wage a war against the Sultan. And the Sultan is very clever, right? So he decides, he plans to get the Sheikh Imamuddin killed in battle, right? And he gets him killed even before the battle begins. What he does is he has an encounter with the Sheikh, and he ensures that he forbids his people from coming to listen to the argument, the debate that he has with the Sheikh. Now, Tughlaq exploits the fact that the Sheikh looks like him, right? And it is also Najib's idea that perhaps they should trap the Sheikh in this battle, right? Because the Sheikh is a formidable opponent, and he's the sternest critic of the Sultan's political plans. And so he decides to get the Sheikh killed in battle against Ain-ul-Mulk. And Najib himself is a man who is a Hindu convert to Islam. He converts to Islam thinking that Islam would bring the kingdom of heaven on earth. In his own words, he hoped that Islam would bring the kingdom of heaven on earth, but then ultimately it's not about religion or religious conversion, in as much as it is about political power that has to be wrested from enemies through war and violence. So they can only take action in the present moment, as he says, and so he encourages the Sultan to actually, ensure that there's no trouble from Ain-ul-Mulk, that he quashes any rebellion from Ain-ul-Mulk, because the Tughlaq's kingdom progressively becomes more and more insecure and hard to control over the course of the play, as different chieftains, different nobles from his kingdom rebel against him for his decision to move the capital and for his apparent partiality towards Hindus. But Muhammad is also very clever. He always tries to sow discord between, let's say, fathers and sons. So so he invites Shihabuddin, the prince of Sampan Shahar, to be at his kingdom in his absence while he fights the war against Mulk. And he does this precisely because the Amir, who is the Shihabuddin's father, does not like him very much. So he tries to sow discord between father and son by seeking the son's favor and by giving him importance and position in his kingdom. And the historian Barani is not for the battle, right? He is very concerned that there will be unnecessary bloodshed in the name of Islam. So he does not wish for the king to fight Ainul Mulk. But Najim is against him, and he encourages him. And the stepmother herself is actually quite concerned and worried about the Sultan and his move to fight this war, and to also get the Sheikh killed. In the third scene, right, the Sultan arranges for a meeting in front of the Great Mosque with the Sheikh Imamuddin, who is a complete critique of Sultan's political plans and ideological dispositions. There is a long debate, argument between the two, by the end of which Imamuddin has been convinced to actually be present at the war, at the battle with Ainul Mulk. The Sultan convinces him to join the battle as an emissary, as a messenger of peace, to tell Ainul Mulk that they will that they cannot fight a war where Muslims kill Muslims. It would be an unfortunate loss of life in the name of Islam. And so he tries to convince the Imam to go as a emissary, as a messenger of peace, to completely in the name of Islam. Right? So, and he also makes sure that there is no one, there's no witness to the meeting, which is why he forbids his people from coming. In the initial discussion or debate between the two, the Imam says that the Sultan has transgressed and he has desecrated the Quran by creating by lifting the jizya tax, by shifting the capital, and by projecting himself as a supporter of Hindus. Muhammad bin Tughlaq here again projects himself as someone who is secular, and he says that I can never make Islam or religion the basis of rule, that politics and religion have to be kept separate. But for the Imam, he says that one can never transgress the rules, the injunctions laid down by the Quran. That all political rule is fundamentally based on the Quran. So the Tughlaq says that, the Imam first says, please, Your Majesty, even you can't believe that. Right? You can't believe what? That Muhammad has gone against the tenets of Islam. And Imam Muhammad says, I have never gone against the tenets of Islam. I've always followed. I've always been devoted to Islam. And the Imam says, I can quote scores of transgressions. If they weren't willful, they could only be results of ignorance. But I can't believe that in a scholar of your eminence. Perhaps you're sincere, but if one fails to understand what the Quran says, one must ask the Sayyids and the ulama. Instead, you have put the best of them behind bars in the name of justice. Muhammad, they tried to indulge in politics. This is the religious leaders of the ulama and the Sayyids. I couldn't allow that. I have never denied the word of God. Sheikh Sahib, because it's my bread and drink. I need it most when the surrounding void pushes itself into my soul and starts putting out every light burning there. But I'm alone in my life. My kingdom has millions, Muslims, Hindus, Jains. Yes, there's dirt and sickness in my kingdom. But why should I call on God to clean up the dirt deposited by men? So he says that he's alone. There's a deep sense of isolation, right? Because he doesn't know how he can rule a kingdom while supporting any particular religious sect, right? So, or religious group. So he has to be above all forms of partisanship in order to be a just ruler. But in the process, he also has to isolate himself because he cannot trust anyone. Right? He's incapable of trusting anyone. Even the religious leaders of the ulama have indulged in politics, he says, that they have tried to fragment the kingdom along religious lines, which the Sultan fears will completely result in the destruction of his kingdom. So why should I call God? So he seems to be the kind of person who does not want to divest himself of agency by investing the same agency in God, but that only a ruler like him can clean up the dirt deposited by other men. The Imam says, because only the voice of God, the holy word, can do it. Please listen to me, Your Majesty. The Arabs spread Islam around the world and they struggled and fought for it for 700 years. They are tired now, limp and exhausted. But their work must continue and we need someone to take the lead. You could do it. You are one of the most powerful kings on earth today. and you could spread the kingdom of heaven on earth. God has given you everything: power, learning, intelligence, talent. Now you must repay his debt. Right? So this is in stark contrast to Najib, or to the Sultan himself, who believes that one cannot wait for God to act on your behalf. One has to act. One has to act on one's own terms. Then the Imam says that, are you willing to actually do it without the Quran to guide you? Beware, Sultan, you are trying to become another god. It's a sin worse than patricide. Right? So what is worse than patricide is to claim to be God yourself. Right? So of course the Imam is also insinuating the Tughlaq's murder of his father and brother during prayer. And Muhammad is also himself proud of being the grandson of a slave who wrested power from the Delhi Sultanate. Right? So a lot of his own lineage, his own ancestry has to do with people who were once slaves, who were once disenfranchised, but have now acquired power. They have wrested power from the ruling powers. Imam says, religion, politics, take heed, Sultan, one day these verbal distinctions will rip you into two. Right? There's no distinction for the Imam, but for Tughlaq there seems to be at least distinction between religious rule and political rule, which have to be kept separate. The Muhammad says, don't I know it? I still remember the days when I read the Greeks. Sukrat, who took poison so he could give the world the drink of gods. Aflatun, who condemned poets and wrote incomparable, beautiful poetry himself. And I can still feel the thrill with which I found a new world, a world I had not found in the Arabs or even the Quran. They tore me into shreds, and to be whole now, I shall have to kill the part of me which sang to them. And my kingdom too is what I am, torn into pieces by visions whose validity I can't deny. You're asking me to make myself complete by killing the Greek in me, and you propose to unify my people by denying the visions which led Zoroaster or the Buddha. I'm sorry, but it can't be done. Right? So he presents himself as someone who is torn apart from these different visions of justice, these different visions of ethical justice from the Buddha or Zoroaster or the early Greek philosophers and poets. So the Sultan is obviously being portrayed in the play as someone who is learned, someone who is intelligent, but is politically inept. He seems to lack the wisdom to be able to actually carefully balance or negotiate the contradictions that make up his own persona. Right, the political contradictions between the subjects who are divided along lines of class and religion, and his own position as a Muslim Sultan in a Hindu majoritarian state. He even insinuates that he has forbidden the people from attending the meeting because the people do not have only have faith in him and not in the sheikh who is dividing the population along communal lines. But later on, he tries to trick the sheikh into meeting Ainul Mulk as a peace emissary. Muhammad tells the sheikh that the people will assume that he is a spy, right? That he is his spy, that they will probably suspect that he is a spy of Islam and as someone who has tried to rise against the Sultan. So he threatens him, but he also tells him that the people are with him, that the people only believe in him, and that the only way that the Imam can actually secure his own power and life is by presenting himself as an emissary of peace at the battlefront. So he does, but then of course what happens at the battle is an ironic tragedy where the Imam is killed even before the battle can begin, just as the Sultan has declared the battle open and on. He is shot by an arrow and he's killed because the opposition assumes that he is the Sultan. And one of the people who actually helps the Sultan in this entire plan and conspiracy is Ratan Singh. Ratan Singh, who is a Hindu but is also loyal to the Sultan. The Sultan also lets go of Ainul Mulk and he restores his position as the governor of Agra, and he also ensures that the sheikh is killed in battle. He observes a day of mourning for the sheikh. He says, there will be no festivities to celebrate the victory. When men like him die, it's a sin to be alive. Right? So he makes it seem like as though the Sultan, the sheikh was a pious and honest and integral subject to his kingdom. And it is Ratan Singh who reveals what actually happens on the battlefront. He says, "So we marched towards Ain-ul-Mulk's army." This is what he tells Shihabuddin, the prince of Shampanshahar. We marched towards Ain-ul-Mulk's army led by the gorgeous sheikh on the royal elephant. The elephant halted about 100 yards away from the enemy. This is in scene 4. The sheikh stood up on it and tried to say something when a trumpeter on our side sounded the charge. The battle was on. Yes, my dear Shihab, Ain-ul-Mulk didn't start the battle. We did. And the Sultan? Ratan Singh replies, I couldn't understand what was happening. Neither did the sheikh, obviously. His face was twisted with fear, but he was shouting at the top of his voice, asking us to stop. He didn't stand a chance. Arrows poured into him, and within minutes, he looked a gory human porcupine. And the Sultan, didn't he do anything? Shihabuddin asks. Ratan Singh replies, he did. The sheikh plunged down from the elephant, and over his corpse we fled in confusion. The enemy was convinced the Sultan was dead, and they pursued us. They walked right into the trap. It was the bloodiest massacre I've ever seen. We won. Sheikh Imamuddin was murdered, in cold blood. So Sheikh Imamuddin has just been used as a decoy, as a scapegoat to win the war against Ain-ul-Mulk. Later in the scene 5, you see again a new conspiracy to kill the Sultan, a conspiracy between Shihabuddin and the two amirs, the two nobles of the royal court. And they're obviously very upset that the Sultan has decided to move the kingdom, the capital, from Delhi to Dalatabad, which is a Hindu city where the Muslims do not have as much power. So again, they decide to murder the Sultan when he is at prayer in the mosque. Sheikh Shamsuddin tries to convince Shihabuddin to actually murder the Sultan, right? Although Shihabuddin initially is unwilling, because he wants to distinguish himself from the other sheikhs who have indulged in political conspiracies against the Sultan. Many of these sheikhs, Sheikh Haidari, Sheikh Hood, and so on, have been sent off in exile, have been exiled by the Sultan. Many of them are in prison, so which is why Shihabuddin is reluctant to actually rise up in rebellion against the Sultan and kill him. But the Sheikh Shamsuddin is trying to convince him to be a part of the conspiracy, to hatch a plan to murder the Sultan. They also discover that the Sultan's soldiers had gone from door to door, forbidding people from attending the meeting between the Sheikh and the Sultan. They're also very resentful and upset that the Sultan has lifted the jizya tax when the Quran sanctions 4 taxes on non-believers and non-Muslims. Right? So they are upset that the jizya sanctioned by the Quran is not being levied anymore, being paid anymore by infidels. So these people definitely want to divide the kingdom along communal lines. In fact, it's Shihabuddin's father who was an ally of the Sheikh and the two amirs, but they're also trying to recruit Shihabuddin into the plan. Right? Ratan Singh seems to be part of the plan, but he ends up betraying them in the end when he writes a letter to the Sultan warning him of this conspiracy, this plan to assassinate him. Ratan Singh says, "Don't be stupid, Shihab. Don't tell me you still think the Amirs want to fight the Sultan in the open, right? Because the Amirs don't have the power to fight the Sultan in the open, so they can only fight him in the sly. You see what it is. Shihab is an intelligent young man, but he's just too nice. You see his father? Shihabuddin, don't Ratan. Ratan Singh, come on, everyone knows about it. His father is supposed to have killed my father by treachery and usurped the kingdom. Shihab can't forget that. He wants to make up for it. That's why I'm here, as his adopted brother. And that's why he just can't stand the mention of treachery." To Shihabuddin. So this is what he's saying to himself. To Shihabuddin, don't overdo it. You'll have to face it someday, after all. What did the Sultan do to Sheikh Imamuddin? Okay, so he tries to threaten him. He tells him that of the possibility that the Sultan may also end up murdering him and the other sheikhs if they do not take action to stop the Sultan. So they plan to act in the name of Islam, and Ratan Singh seems to go along with their plan, but then later on he ends up becoming the most loyal subject of the Sultan by warning him of the plot to assassinate him. So even though prayer is supposed to be a pure moment where there cannot be any violence and bloodshed, the amirs and the sheikh, corrupt as they are, anxious to secure the power, their own authority and the power of the Muslims, decides to actually attack the Sultan precisely during prayer. So this happens in scene 6, where the amirs and Shihabuddin are on the verge of executing their plan. But Tughlaq pretends to not know what's happening. Initially, they try to beg. Shihabuddin tries to implore the Sultan, asking him not to change the capital from Delhi to Dalatabad. But then Muhammad is not willing to listen to them. He also announces the circulation of copper currency along with silver dinars. And when the public protest, he says that you'll have to just imagine that the copper currency has the same value as silver and gold, and that if they have faith in him, they will also have faith in the copper currency, right? And this is also very prescient move, because this anticipates the circulation of the introduction of paper currency in China 50 years later. So it's all about faith. Right? He says, if you have faith in me, if you have faith in the Sultan, so kingship, right, being Sultan itself becomes a fetish, right? Because one has to have faith in it, even though the power of the Sultan is actually increasingly growing hollow. It's not absolute power, it's not a transcendental power, but it's actually growing more and more insecure and hollow. And yet people have to pretend as though ultimate power and authority is vested in the Sultan, just like it is in the currency he introduces in the kingdom as a common mode of exchange. Tughlaq seems to actually initially beg their support, the support of the amirs and Shihabuddin. But Shihabuddin is embarrassed and says it's not right for a king to beg. A king should only command. But then obviously by now we know that the Sultan knows of their plan. So he gets up, he walks to the throne, and he picks up a copy of the Quran, and he asks them to swear on the Quran that they will support him in all measure. And Shihabuddin is unwilling, and he says, does His Majesty distrust me so much that he needs an oath on the Quran from us? And that is when the Sultan rises up in rage against Shihabuddin and the others, and from nowhere 20 Hindu soldiers rush in with spears, and they surround the amirs. And as the amirs try to run out, the soldiers bar their way, and then the soldiers drag them away, all except Shihabuddin. And while all this is going on, Muhammad bin Tughlaq is just praying unconcerned. It's only after he finishes his prayer that he steps down from the throne, and there's a silence, and Shihabuddin asks him how he got to know about the conspiracy. And then he says that he mentions the letter that he got from Ratan Singh, warning him about the plot to assassinate him. And he asked Shihabuddin that, why have you gone against me? What have I done wrong? And Shihabuddin says, get on with your killing, Muhammad, or does your hand refuse to rise against me? Beware, you won't be able to trap me with your wiles. I'm not Ainul Mulk to live crushed under your kindness. Right? And Muhammad slowly takes out his dagger and repeatedly stabs Shihabuddin until he is dead. And this leaves Muhammad feeling rather anguished. The Sultan asks, why must this happen, to his historian? Why must this happen, Barani? Are all those I trust condemned to go down in history as traitors? What is happening? Tell me, Barani, will my reign be nothing more than a tortured scream which will stab the night and melt away in silence? Najib, see that every man involved in this is caught and beheaded. So in order to actually completely quash the rebellion and to make sure that there are no witnesses to the murder, he asks his prime minister to capture each and every man who was caught, who was involved in the conspiracy. He wants to stuff their bodies with straw and hang them up in the palace yard for everyone to watch, as an example to all those who wish to transgress and challenge his rule. He also decides to hold a funeral for Shihabuddin, and he wishes to remember Shihabuddin as a martyr, as someone who died protecting the Sultan from the attack. Right? So he also invites Shihabuddin's father to the funeral and treats him with the respect that's due to the father of a loyal nobleman. So you see how clever Muhammad bin Tughlaq is that even though he's been attacked, he's been betrayed by a person whom he trusted. He wants to he wants the people to believe that all those concerned to believe that he is a martyr who tried to who died trying to protect the Sultan's life from the attacking noblemen. And that's when Muhammad bin Tughlaq decides to make it compulsory for everyone to leave Delhi, to vacate Delhi and to leave for Daulatabad, because he feels that he has to make the trip as soon as possible before he is again betrayed and his moves are he is frustrated by all his enemies. He also decides that there will be no more praying in the kingdom, because now praying has come to be associated with murder and betrayal, and so he says there will be no more praying in the kingdom. He tells his prime minister, anyone caught praying will be severely punished. Henceforth, let the moment of prayer walk my streets in silence and leave without a trace. Right? So prayer comes to be identified with betrayal and bloodshed. In scene 7, you see Aziz and Azam acting as wayside robbers who kill and steal the assets, the property, the money of the wealth of the people who are moving from Delhi to Daulatabad. Right? And the journey itself is an arduous one, which ends in sickness and disease and death. In fact, Aziz also impersonates the Brahmin in the camp, and he even disallows a Hindu woman who needs to take her child to a nearby hospital or doctor, refuses to let her go. Right? Even after her child is dead, she refuses to let the Hindu woman go. And this is when Aziz also decides to plans to produce counterfeit copper currency. Right? So he tells Azam, "Don't call me Aziz. I've told you. As for her," referring to the Hindu woman, "I've only obeyed my orders. Besides, I'm a Brahmin, and she won't complain against a Brahmin to a Muslim officer. That'll send her straight to hell. In any case, and listen to this carefully, we won't stay in the Sultan's service for long. I heard some rumors in Delhi. The Sultan is going to introduce copper coins soon, and a copper coin will have the same value as a silver dinar. What do you say to that?" In scene 8, the Sultan meets one of the young soldiers who doesn't recognize him initially, who has been entrusted with the responsibility of guarding the fort, right, in Daulatabad. And he meets one of the sentries, who's a young man of 19. And then Muhammad says, 19, nice age. An age when you think you can clasp the whole world in your palm like a rare diamond. I was 21 when I came to Daulatabad first and built this fort. I supervised the placing of every brick in it, and I said to myself, one day I shall build my own history like this, brick by brick. One night I was standing on the ramparts of the old fort here. There was a torch near me flapping its wild wings and scattering golden feathers on everything in sight. There was a half-built gate nearby trying to contain the sky within its cleft. Suddenly something happened, as though someone had cast a spell. The torch, the gate, the fort, and the sky all melted and merged and flowed in my bloodstream with the darkness of the night. The moment shed its symbols, its questions and answers, and stood naked and calm where the stars throbbed in my veins. I was the earth, was the grass, was the smoke, was the sky. Suddenly a sentry called from far, "Attention, attention!" And to that challenge, the half-burnt torch and the half-built gate fell apart. "No, young man, I don't envy you your youth. All that you have to face and suffer is still ahead of you. Look at me. You have searched for that moment since then, and here I am still searching for it. But in the last 4 years, I have seen only the woods clinging to the earth, heard only the howl of wild wolves and the answering bay of street dogs. Another 20 years and you'll be as old as me. I might be lying under those woods there by them. Do you think you'll remember me then?" So he's obviously identifying partly with the youth of the century, and he remembers his own youth when he felt the entire world belonged to him. But then he also then looks back in irony, and looks at how his present life couldn't be more different from his youth, when now he has become completely isolated by all those whom he thought he could trust, who have now betrayed him, who have now tried to kill him. And so now he feels extremely lonely and isolated, right, as someone who cannot keep the kingdom together, who believes that he is above all the laws of justice that he formulates, and yet is unable to actually enact an actual realizable concrete program of justice, which is constituted only by the people and their interests. He also realizes that Hindu homes, every Hindu home has become a domestic mint. He looks at how traders are just waiting for me to close my eyes, and in my whole kingdom there are only two people I can trust, Ain-ul-Mulk and Shihabuddin's father. What should I do, Barani? What would you prescribe for this honeycomb of disease? So he's not able to trust anyone. Even the people, even his plan to actually produce copper currency has been subverted by the production of counterfeit copper coins and mass corruption. And his historian Barani, who's only a historian, says that when he asks Barani what to do, Barani says, I cannot prescribe. I cannot prescribe. It's not my place to prescribe what the king or what the sultan should do. And he says that maybe perhaps he should just join the ranks of learned men, since he's learned himself, and abandon the kingdom. But Tughlaq is unwilling and unable to abandon the kingdom. Right? He is. On one hand, he would wish to sit by the Kaaba in Mecca and search for peace, which Daulatabad hasn't given me, it hasn't given him. But at the same time, he realizes that he is consumed and possessed by this disease for power, for authority, which he just cannot seem to be able to shake off and let go. Right? So he says that, don't you see, this patient, referring to himself, racked by fear and crazed by the fear of the enveloping vultures, can't be separated from me? Don't you see that the only way I can abdicate the throne is by killing myself? I could have done something if the vultures weren't so close. I could have crawled forward my knees and elbows. But what can you do when every moment you expect a beak to dig into you and tear a muscle out? What can you do? Right? So he is on the one hand, he is willing to let go of everything, and he wishes that he could let go of everything and search for peace in Mecca. But on the other hand, he also feels that he cannot let go of his kingdom precisely at this very insecure moment where everyone is trying to topple and overturn his power and authority. Barani says that, Your Majesty, there was a time when you believed in ideal, in love, in peace, in God. What has happened to those ideals? You won't let your subjects pray. You torture them for the smallest offense, hang them on suspicion. Why this bloodshed? Please stop it, and I promise Your Majesty something better will emerge out of it. And Muhammad bin Tughlaq says, but for that I'll have to admit I've been wrong all along. So he's not willing to admit that he was wrong in the first place by carrying out all these preemptive measures to quash any rebellion by killing people at the slightest suspicion. And I know I haven't. I have something to give, something to teach, which may open the eyes of history, but I have to do it within this life. I've got to make them listen to me before I lose even that. Right? So he's determined to not let go of his ideals, that he will commit any amount of violence and bloodshed in the name of his own ideals. The fact that he is striving very hard, he's desperate to actually present himself as an ideal ruler. So which is why, in fact, the play is really about the writing of history itself, about what it means to write a history. What does it mean to write an official history, and in what ways can we actually question official history for its prejudices, for its loopholes? And it is also, in some sense, popularizes the image, the impression of Muhammad as mad, as a madman who is driven by his own passion, his own desire for power, the ghosts of which refuse to leave him in peace. Right? So even though he seems to apparently desire peace and equality and calm and harmony, he's unable to actually let go of his own greed and greed for power, absolute power. In scene 9, Azam and Aziz accidentally chance upon Ghiyasuddin, who is on his way to meet the Sultan because he's been invited to actually purify and bless the new capital of Daulatabad. Aziz and Azam capture Ghiyasuddin, and they end up murdering him. And Aziz impersonates Ghiyasuddin in order to gain access to the Sultan in his court. Ghiyasuddin himself is, even though he's been invited as an Abbasid a sheikh who can bless, who has the power to bless and purify the capital, he's himself someone who comes from a very humble and modest background. He says he grew up in filth and he lived in filth, and then a letter from nowhere. Right? So he believes that this letter, this invitation from the Sultan, will give him the prestige and the power that he never had back at home. In scene 10, Tughlaq discovers from his stepmother that she poisoned Najib to death, his prime minister, and so she also orders his stepmother to be poisoned to death. Right? He is upset that the stepmother has also betrayed. So he believes that Najib has been killed for no reason, while in response to his stepmother's accusations, he says that he killed his father and his brother for an ideal. Right? In scene 11, when Aziz makes his appearance as Ghiyasuddin, there are many people, many of whom are Hindus in the audience, who recognize him as the wayside robber who killed their children, and forbid them from escaping. Right? So they all accuse him of having captured them, tortured them, killed their children, for having robbed them of their wealth. And this is when Muhammad bin Tughlaq also discovers the real person who's behind the disguise. And in scene 13, we see that Muhammad finally finds his most loyal companion in Aziz, who is the real double. He finds his match in Aziz, who has managed to subvert all his plans, all his strategies to consolidate his power and authority. So the only one who actually benefits from all the political contradictions of the Sultan and the loopholes in his plan is Aziz. And even though the historian Barani warns Tughlaq from granting or offering Aziz a position in his court, Muhammad believes that he can finally only recognize himself in Aziz, right, as a man who wanted more than he could have. Right? So he identifies and admires Aziz's ambition, right? His ambition, his desire to move above his own low station. And in the last conversation between Aziz and the Sultan, Aziz reveals his past conspiracies to his plots, his plans to the Sultan. And Tughlaq is completely impressed by Aziz's courage. So even just as he's about on the verge of killing Aziz, Aziz says that, "Come on, sir, let's be sensible. You know His Majesty will never do that to me, as in will never imprison me or kill me." He says, "Ever since Your Majesty came to the throne, I have been your most devout servant. I have studied every order, followed every instruction, considered every measure of Your Majesty's with the greatest attention. I insist I am Your Majesty's true disciple." Then later on, Aziz says, "Your Majesty has publicly welcomed me as a saint, started the public prayers after a lapse of 5 years in my honor, called me a savior. Your Majesty has even forgiven me for pointing it out. I wasn't responsible for it, fallen at my feet publicly." Then Aziz says, "I'm not a common blackmailer, Your Majesty. I stand here on the strength of my convictions and my loyalty to you." Aziz says, "I was a poor starving dhobi when Your Majesty came to the throne and declared the brotherhood of all religions. Does the Sultan remember the Brahmin who brought the case against him and won? I was that Brahmin. Was that disguise necessary?" Aziz says, "I believe so, since soon after Your Majesty introduced the new copper currency, I succumbed to its temptation. Then there was enough money in that business, but too much competition. Soon it became unprofitable. So we took the silver dinars and went to Doab and bought some land there for farming." And Muhammad realizes that he has bought the land dirt cheap and collected also the state subsidy for the farmers. and when they discovered, they escaped to the hills and became wayside robbers. Aziz says, "Your Majesty missed out an important stage in my life. Your officers tracked down criminals with the zest of a tribe of hunters, and there's only one way to escape them. We joined them. We had to shift the corpses of all the rebels executed by the state and hang them up for exhibition. Such famous kings, warriors, and leaders of men passed through our hands then. Beautiful, strong bodies and bodies eaten up by corruption. All were stuffed with straw and went up to the top of the poles. One day, suddenly, I had a revelation. This was all human life was worth," I said. "This was the real meaning of the mystery of death, straw and skin. With that enlightenment, I found peace. We left the camp and headed for the hills." So he found peace in the fact that this was all that human life was worth. When he discovered that all the princes and kings and chieftains that he had killed, all the warriors he had killed, was only skin and bones, and they could easily be stuffed with straw and exhibited as trophies of the Sultan's power. Then Aziz says, "One day I heard about a beggar who claimed to be Ghiyasuddin Abbasid and was on his way to the capital. I couldn't resist the temptation of seeing my master in person. I admit I killed Ghiyasuddin and cheated you, yet I am your Majesty's true disciple. I ask you, your Majesty, which other man in India has spent 5 years of his life fitting every act, deed and thought to His Majesty's words?" The Sultan is enraged by Aziz's treachery, but he can't help being impressed by the man's cunning, cleverness and courage. So Aziz says that what if I'm a dhobi? I may be masquerading as a saint, but I'm still a saint is no match for a dhobi whose job is to wash away filth. Right? So my job is to wash away filth, and no saint can match me. So Muhammad is upset, but also very impressed by the Aziz's insolence. And when he asks him on how he should punish him, Aziz says, "Make me an officer of your state." And he says that if he were made an officer in the state, he would do anything for him. He would show him his loyalty, and he was ready to die for the Sultan. And so he finally does grant Aziz with a state office, much against the remonstrations of Barani, who thinks that he's making the worst mistake by appointing someone who is definitely going to betray him and kill him. And then he says, all your life, Muhammad realizes that he has finally met his mirror image, his companion in Aziz. All your life you wait for someone who understands you, and then you meet him, punishment for wanting too much. As he said, one day suddenly I had a revelation. And he also realizes that Ain Mulk, by killing Sheikh Imamuddin, has also lost the support of the Maulvis and the people. So he needs Tughlaq, Muhammad bin Tughlaq's support. And so ultimately, even though when Barani also uses an excuse to leave the service of the Sultan under the pretext of going to see his dying mother, he realizes that he can no longer work for the Sultan, because the Sultan is completely crazed and driven by politics, and there's no space left for peace, for transparency, for innocence. Right? I mean, everything is corrupt. Everything has been corrupted by the Sultan, the Tughlaq's own plan to seize absolute power and justice. So, which is why he ends up appointing Aziz as his state officer. Right? So, let's actually end with that, which is our discussion of Girish Karnad's Tughlaq. We will continue our discussion of Girish Karnad with his play on the dream of Tipu Sultan next. Thank you.